All right, everyone. So we're into our EPQ, right? We've been doing it for a little while. We've got some of those initial things out of the way. We've got our proposal approved, okay? Now we are looking to make sure we get the maximum amount of marks on our EPQ. I'm going to give you some really helpful tips and tricks today for filling in a substantial part of the production log, which is the reviews. You've got 3 reviews to do. The production log, as we talked about, a massive amount of marks for your EPQ. Okay, there's no official split of it. It's going to be like 50% for the production log, 50% for the final product, right? It doesn't really work like that. But the production log marks you're going to get are really, really, really important. Okay, so I'm going to tell you how to easily phrase things, write things, put things in that production log that are going to get you to top level marks. And it's not that difficult to do, but you do need to be specific. Often what you get in production logs, either people who don't write enough, who just write the bare minimum and don't really understand how they're getting marked, or even the other end of the scale, they write too much, they just write a huge block of text and it doesn't hit the key things, the tips and tricks that you're going to need to get up to those top level marks. So I'm going to go through those. You've got 3 reviews, as I said. We've got the planning review, we've got the mid-project review, and we've got the end project review. And they'll happen when you've met your supervisor on 3 different occasions throughout the course of the project. Now, they're slightly different in the way that they're phrased, but essentially, each of these reviews is split into 3 sections. Where you are now, what's your advice from your supervisor, and what modifications have you made based on your supervisor's comments? Now, let's have a look at how we're going to get marks based on that. The where you are now bit up at the top is phrased slightly differently in each EPQ, but it's basically saying what point have you got to at this point. What you want to try and think about is what are the successes so far and what are the key problems. Problems are good. Lots of students come into this thinking, I've got to represent myself as being absolutely outstanding at everything, otherwise I'm not going to get the A star. But actually, if you can show me difficulties that you've come across, all projects are going to have difficulties, right? If you can show me difficulties and then work out how to overcome those difficulties, that's where the juice is in terms of getting marks, right? So let's again have a look at our 4 assessment objectives, AO1, AO2, AO3, AO4. This time I've given you some bullet points which tell you some things that you've got to do when you're thinking about the assessment objectives. So let's have a look at that first section of our review, right, where you say where you are currently with your project, right? Here we're going to try and hit some AO1 marks and some AO2 marks. AO1 marks are for planning, AO2 marks are for the resources that you use, okay? So if we have a look at some of these bullet points up here, what we've got to try and show is that we are planning and managing the project well, and that we're monitoring our progress against our initial aims and objectives, and we're using a range of resources. In that first section up at the top, if you tell me specifically resources that you've managed to find that are proving really interesting at the minute, if you tell me resources that are a bit problematic at the minute, or areas of research where you're not entirely sure what's going on with it, if you've come to a dead end with a bit of research, if you've discovered that your question doesn't quite work, all of those things, be as specific as possible. Don't just say, my question doesn't work. Tell me what the question is and tell me what the specific problem with it is. Don't just tell me this resource isn't very good. Why isn't it very good? The more specific you can be, the better marks you're going to get for those AO1 and AO2. Then you're going to get some advice from your supervisor. If you haven't got advice from your supervisor on those things, talk to your supervisor. Go out independently yourself and ask them questions about what they would suggest. Ideally, this middle section on advice from your supervisor, you want to try and give that advice as vaguely as possible. My supervisor kind of guided me towards this. My supervisor sort of said I should do this. So, for example, a really common one is, my question isn't quite specific enough. They said I need to narrow down the field of my research a little bit, right? Again, with that, make it vague, make it simple. We don't need tons and tons of detail and advice from supervisor, because ideally what the exam board wants to see is that you independently are driving this project. If the advice from the supervisor is basically telling you what to do and you just follow that advice, well, that's not really you putting the work in, and that's what they want to see. So make it vague, that advice from the supervisor. Where you start to get more specific is the bit down at the bottom, and this is the main bit that you're going to get marks for in our review. This is where we're going to start to get some of those AO3 marks. If you remember, AO3 marks are worth twice as much as the other assessment objectives, right? So these are really important marks. And what we're going to try and do in this bottom section is make appropriate decisions on the project's development, make clear and appropriate changes with justification, and down at the bottom there, AO4, identify the strengths and weaknesses of the project. Now with this, let's say you had said that your question needed to get more specific. Down here, you're going to tell me exactly how you've made it more specific. What are you specifying on? What criteria are you putting in there? And you also need to tell me why you've made that decision, right? So if you're now going to specialize in a very narrow bit of your project, why pick that bit over all of the other possible options? The answer should always be because I found a bit of research that told me this is the appropriate thing to look at. It can't just be because that thing seemed easier or it seemed more fun to do that, right? It needs to be, I've gone away and done a bit of research, and this is the thing that everybody is interested in at the minute. This is the one that people think is going to be the key factor. And then specifying that, tell me exactly what it is. If you can tell me the resource that you used, the research that you came up with that's made you make that decision, that's absolutely fantastic as well. Because what that shows in that page is you've got a problem, you've thought it through, you've been specific about it, you've used resources to work it out, and then you've developed your project as a result. And that's where you're going to get all of your marks.